Hope you can see my screen as well.
Yes, Shashank.
Firstly, I would really like to thank Professor Vinod and head of the department for having me here. I'm really excited to be talking to you all. I think after I started Second Eyes, I'm the co-founder, CTO. This is my first external talk, would say. So would be very, very excited to and glad to share all my experiences and learnings and open problems in the space that we are working. Okay. So let's get started. So the talk is about demystifying cyber risks and the road ahead. Myself, Dr. Seshank Dara, the CTO and co-founder of Second Eyes. I did briefly check upon the agenda. It's a tightly packed and very exciting talks on all the days, covering numerous topics, malware, mobile malware, ransomware, and a lot of research that is being presented. So this talk will be slightly different in terms of we'll be taking a few steps back, trying to get the macro picture of what's going on, why we are in this situation, especially with respect to cyber attacks. How do we put all these things together? How do we connect these dots? And how do we have a cyber safe future? So that's the reason the talk is also titled that, what is the road ahead? Okay, so let's get started. So we live in a completely digitized, as much as possible, I would say, in a digitized world, and especially with the COVID times, almost everything is gone online. Even these conferences otherwise would be having in person, almost everything, education, all the businesses, everything going online. So with unprecedented digitization, the opportunities are huge, of course. It's a completely brave new world, the new normal, they say. But in the new normal, the opportunities also come with great risks. Those are cyber risks. Okay. Almost any of the organization's assets, if you take 85% to 95% are in the digital format. You have your files on cloud, you have your laptops connected, you have your personal devices on which you are checking official emails, you have IoT devices, you have, you know, how many digital devices we have at home and office, right? And on an average, the cost of a data breach is $4 million per company. It's a global average we are talking. And almost $600 billion are being lost due to cyber attacks. Okay, so, and of course, due to COVID, there is a new set of challenges, as a certain India's premier computer emergency response team been providing guidelines and advisories on it. There's a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks that are themed under COVID. You know, there are phishing campaigns going on fake vaccines. There is so much fake news going on. There are fake apps coming up. There is simply so much, and there are ransomware attacks on hospitals that are happening, right? We even recorded, and very, very unfortunately, that we recorded first fatal incident in Germany where a patient died because the hospital is under ransomware attack and the doctors could not see her in time. She had to be shifted to a different hospital and such like. So it becomes unprecedented for us to understand these new attack frontiers and how to handle this. How do we get a good handle on the entire gamut of things that is going on? Okay. So before even going there, right? As I said, like, this talk is more about taking a few steps back, understanding the big picture, putting things in perspective, and trying to find solutions for it. So this is more an open-ended talk. What I gathered from Professor Vinod is that the participants are researchers, students, faculty members, even Department of Police and such like. So this talk I have designed in such a way that it is more open-ended talk. That means I try to bring out a lot of problems here that are pending to be solved, like InfoSec community, like us, everyone included, on how do we solve these problems? What are the different problems that we are seeing facing every day, in day out with the organizations, right? Even last week, there was a major attack on FireEye, and there is a new supply chain attack. Everyone is talking about SolarWinds. Even yesterday and today, we are busy answering questions to our customers, assuring them on what kind of measures they should take, and how to be safe from these kind of a modern attacks, right? So as I said, this talk is about taking few steps back and understanding the big picture, right? So before even we get into those big picture, right, we need to get the definitions right. It's very, very important that what exactly we mean by a risk, what is a vulnerability, or what is a control, right? What does this mean? Unfortunately or fortunately, there is so much misinformation, misappropriation going on, where news agencies, companies, corporates, security vendors, everyone is trying to use their own jargon. So there is so much confusion around what is a threat, what is a risk, what is an attack, what is a vulnerability, what is a control, right? But we are researchers, right? We want to solve these problems. Now, before even we solve the problems, we want to define what exactly we are trying to solve. So that's where I start with definitions in terms of what exactly is a vulnerability, right? What are we talking about when somebody says that, hey, there is a SQL injection, or there is something that is not encrypted? Is it really a big deal? Okay, just by mere existence, is it a big deal, right? So let's see what those things are. So vulnerability means it's just a weakness in an information system. It could be information system, it could be security procedures, it could be internal controls, configurations, or even the implementation of IT infrastructure itself, right? It is just a weakness. Maybe something is left out. I know for sure that many of us would not even enabled second factor authentication on Gmail, right? Or for that matter, the laptops that data what we have we would not even have enabled encryption, right? These are vulnerabilities by themselves. They may not mean anything, as I will shortly discuss what exactly that means, right? And many of the web applications may have vulnerabilities such as SQL injection, wherein attacker will try to send a special crafted request and try to retrieve data from it, right? So these are all technical vulnerabilities. Okay. Now, what is a threat? Is threat and vulnerability the same? Not really. Unless we get these definitions right, unless we understand what exactly each term means, there is absolutely no way for us to go forward in terms of how do we challenge the status quo? How do we invent the future? How do we make the cyber a safe future, right? So what exactly is a threat? A threat is a circumstance or an event with the potential to adversely impact an organizational operations. So it could be denial of service, it could be ransomware, it could be phishing. These are threats, these are not vulnerabilities, right? So threat by its own does not make sense again. Denial of service, like for example, somebody attacking a website with hundreds and thousands of requests, as just like 2 days back, Gmail was done. Of course, we are not sure yet, is it a DDoS attack or simply some misconfiguration that resulted in denial of service. But at the end of the day, users, due to that outage, were not able to use or consume Google services. Ransomware attacks, right? So these are threats. Phishing is the top threat, wherein if we are unaware of the damages that are caused, then we would likely go click on an email that might infect our system and steal our data and such like. So these are threats. So threats and vulnerabilities should not be confused together. They two mean separate. Okay, they two are different words, terms. Now, who is a threat actor? In terms of a threat actor is an individual or a group of individuals. So these are the ones we call cyber criminals, attackers, hackers. Unfortunately, the word hackers itself is being used in a wrong connotation. Hackers means really smart people, does not necessarily mean that they're bad guys. So a threat actor is someone who can do this harm, who can manifest a threat, who can pose a threat to an organization and its assets. Okay, so it could be anyone. It could be even some employee who is unhappy for some reason, or it could be a seasoned cyber criminal who is scanning the entire internet to find out which are open systems that he can attack and gain some kind of a benefit from it. Or it could be even competitors, right? Somebody who wants to beat you in your business, so they may be prying on you to get intellectual property or whatever. So this is a classic that happens. There are absolutely many reports on two internet giants, like one is Google and one is Baidu, and one is trying to attack Google to get the source code and such like. So these things happen. These are real. Like there are ample reports around that. And sometimes even it could be nation state actors, right? Even yesterday's yesterday's attack on SolarWinds and such like, people are trying to point, hey, it could be Russia, or it could be sometimes some other attacks are from North Korea and such like. So sometimes this, even NSA, even NSA kind of a security agencies also could be threat actors. So the complexity of the problem increases with the kind of a threat actor we are dealing with, because sometimes these threat actors have unprecedented sources all the time in the world, all the kind of resources. Their only job is to break into systems, right? For whatever reasons. Okay, so that is a threat actor. That individual or group is a threat actor. Now, what is threat intelligence, right? So these terms are very, very important. That's why I'm trying to emphasize and iterate upon. Threat intelligence is a collection of artifacts that aids in identifying a cyber attack. Now, how do we say a particular company got attacked, right? Only by finding some evidences of or tracks of an attacker. Now, what are these evidences? Unless we create, or unless there is an availability of signatures, right? Signature of an attack. It could be bad IP address. It could be file hashes in terms of a malware file hashes, or it could be malicious process names, or it could be any of those TTPs, as in they call techniques, and procedures that the bad actors, that the threat actors deploy in order to find a loophole and exploit, right? So the collection of these artifacts is threat intelligence. There are two more important terms that we need to understand before even we go into understanding what is a cyber risk. So we have seen what is vulnerability, we have seen what is threat, we have seen who is a threat actor, and what is threat intelligence. Now, the last two terms that are of importance is what is the impact, right? It could be, the impact could be on an organization, on an individual, in terms of either financial or reputational losses, right? What worse can happen, or sometimes even human loss as well, as we have seen in the recent ransomware attack on a hospital where lives were lost. So it could be even a fatality as well, human fatality as well, right? So examples could be loss of productivity, like 3 days back when Google was down, people were not able to work because they could not access their email, they could not search and such like. Sometimes it could be revenue loss, right? So due to a cyber attack, if the company is down, or if the company is, for example, if there's a $1 billion sale on Amazon website, and if Amazon website is down due to a DDoS attack, then it's a huge loss for the organization. And not only the first order losses, there are second order losses, like, there is cost of investigations, there are penalties. For example, if it is a privacy breach, right? People trying to collect the data and trying to sell it and such like. If there is a privacy breach, then there are huge penalties to be paid by regulations such as GDPR. Or sometimes it could be loss of brand reputation itself, right? So this is the impact. So what are organizations doing in order to reduce the impact and such like? Controls are, it can be a technical control or a non-technical control, right? A technical or non-technical information that exists to remediate or mitigate any potential impact, right? So it could be information asset, rather, it's, the sentences need small correction. It could be a technical or non-technical information asset that exists to remediate or mitigate any potential impact. It could be an antivirus that you install in the laptops. It could be a firewall at the network, or it could be a threat intelligence platform, or a SIEM, the security incident and event management system. Or sometimes it could be non-technical controls as well. It could be training. Training is one of the most effective control, right? Training people to not to click on a bad email is one of the most effective control. And sometimes having a proper policies and procedures also is a good control. Okay, so we have seen what is a vulnerability, we have seen what is a threat, we have seen what is who is a threat actor, what is threat intelligence, what is impact, and what is control. Now let us define what is cyber risk. Okay, what is a cyber risk? Cyber risk is the likelihood of a threat's occurrence by a threat actor resulting in an adverse impact after exploiting a vulnerability, right? So you can't take each element out of it. It is, let's say in technical terms, it's a function. It's a function of all the words that we have just learned, right? there should be a likelihood attached to it, right? For example, a high likelihood of a cyber criminal exploiting a SQL injection on a website resulting in a loss of data. This is a risk. You can't take things out of and say, hey, SQL injection is risk. No, it is just a vulnerability. What if there is a SQL injection on a read-only blog that no one reads? That's not a risk. You don't lose much data. Anyway, all the blog's content is on the website. Even if somebody tries a SQL injection on that and tries to retrieve, then it's foolish, right? So there should be an impact. There should be a threat actor who is trying to exploit a vulnerability on a particular instance, and there should be a high likelihood of it. There should be impact of it. Only then we need to call it as a cyber risk. Why I'm trying to emphasize this word cyber risk is that we'll see in the later phases, there is simply so much noise going around what is risk. Okay, so sometimes it introduces FUD, as they say, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It is very, very dangerous. If we confuse with the vulnerability, just by mere existence of a vulnerability that it's a risk, then it is inducing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Mere existence of an employee with past criminal record might introduce FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. No, we have to think through a proper perspective and then understand whether it is a risk or not. This is very, very important, because the customers or the organizations who are using this IT technology, they are busy with their business as they should be, in terms of they have to deal with their customers, they have to offer their services on their websites, or if it is hospital, they have to deliver their health services. If it is bank, they have to deliver their financial services. They should be focusing on that. If we are confusing them with this uncertain terminology that used, then they cannot conduct their business. They cannot offer their hospital services. They cannot offer their financial services, right? It causes unnecessary confusion, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So that is the reason it is very, very important for us to understand what exactly is a risk. We should not confuse a vulnerability with a risk, right? So these are the few examples. A high likelihood of a disgruntled employee stealing an intellectual property from a file server. Now, only when all these elements align, that is when we call it is a risk. Just by having a disgruntled employee who is a threat actor in this case doesn't mean it's a risk. Just by having intellectual property doesn't mean it's a risk. Just by having a file server doesn't mean it's a risk. It's just an asset. It's just an IT asset, right? Only when all these things align, and then when there is a high likelihood of that actor acting upon it, only then it is a risk. This is the same. High likelihood of an untrained employee just clicking on a phishing email resulting in disruption of operations. That is a risk. Just by not putting an employee into training doesn't mean it's a risk. Okay, so this is very, very important for us. Now, what cyber risk is not, right? This is to remove all the confusion. Cyber risk is not mere existence of a vulnerability. This is not mere absence of a control. This is not mere presence of an indicator of compromise. Not really a risk. Maybe there is a laptop that is no one is using, and there is probably some files that might be virus, right? Maybe that laptop itself is not connected to anything. Maybe it is harmless. So that doesn't mean it's risk, right? Okay. So just by mere presence of a threat actor, probable threat actor, just because somebody accessed legitimately your files for his conducting his work, and if he has some criminal past, doesn't mean that is a threat actor. And simply because there is no formal policy around when the systems should be patched doesn't mean risk. So it's very, very important. So to summarize, risk is a function of assets as in any information assets, because we are talking about cyber risks, and vulnerabilities on those assets, the threats that could exploit these vulnerabilities, and what kind of a controls that are there. Now, you could ask, like, where are threat actors and threat intelligence? I'll just fold it up into one factor called threats. Okay, so threats itself means, just for the simplicity's sake, the assumption is that there is a threat actor and there is a threat intel and such factors. So simplistically put, a cyber risk is defined as a function of assets, vulnerabilities, threats, and controls, right? Now you would find numerous different variations of this. Now somebody says vulnerability into threat, threat into control, vulnerability into asset. No, it's not. It's not such a trivialized definition. It's a function. Now we will see shortly on how do we define the risk, what are the open problems in the risk. So then I'll cover what exactly are the challenges in order to say risk scoring, or how do we even rate the risks and such like. So there are numerous interesting research problems out there that as a community, as an infosec enthusiast and as an infosec community, we all should be solving these problems, okay, for a future, for a cyber safe future. So now we have seen what is a cyber risk. Now what is cyber risk management, right? What exactly this means. Now cyber risk management on a particular entity, let's say an organization, it could be a hospital, it could be a bank, it could be your college, it could be anything. Or sometimes even it could be our homes, because there are so many IT devices at home, right? We have mobile phones, we have Wi-Fi devices, we have voice control devices, we have sensors and God not everything. Our homes are itself a mini offices of late, correct? So what exactly is cyber risk management? So cyber risk management is a complete life cycle. A life cycle wherein we identify these risks, we contextualize these risks, we prioritize these risks, we remediate them, and we validate whether these remediations are working or not. So this is a full cycle, okay? Only when we have necessary measures in an organization, in an IT environment that will encompass all these 5 stages, that is when we are ready for facing any kind of a threats from external or internal, right? You need to have all these measures in place. It's like preparing, right? It's like preparing for a war. Only when we are well prepared, that is when we can win any kind of war, okay? So these are the 5 steps. Now let us quickly see what exactly is happening right now. Right now, as we speak, cyber risk management is completely broken, right? Unfortunately or fortunately, traditionally, many people say, hey, we are doing cyber risk management, but turns out to be wrong, turns out to be false, right? How are they doing? There are few organizations deploying vulnerability management tools and technologies, and they may think that they're doing cyber risk management. No, as we have seen in the few examples before and the definitions, just by managing vulnerabilities alone does not mean risks, does not mean cyber risks, okay? That is because vulnerabilities will be tens and hundreds and thousands, and they lack contextualization, okay? Let me decipher this each term, okay? What is contextualization? Okay, contextualization means, as I said, like mere existence of a vulnerability does not mean risk. That vulnerability should be exploitable. Okay, there should be exploit script, either publicly available or privately available, or somewhere there should be an exploit script that can, or script or whatever tool or whatever, that can exploit this vulnerability. Mere existence of vulnerability is not dangerous. Now, the context is that there should be an exploit tool available. That exploit tool should be actively used in some campaign, in terms of there is an active malware sweeping the internet, like PTR ransomware or WannaCry or any of those popular terms. Just by mere existence of an exploit does not necessarily mean it's a high risk, because there should be an active threat actor. In the case of WannaCry and PTR ransomware, there are proper cyber criminals scanning the entire internet to get control on it. Even the ransomware cases, right? Recently, FBI has arrested, with coordination with Interpol, numerous such gangs across the world who are operating these cyber criminal activities and scanning the internet and finding that, right? So just by merely managing vulnerabilities or having the ability to manage the vulnerabilities does not mean they're doing cyber risk. It's very inefficient, it's very laborious, because there are tens and hundreds and thousands of vulnerabilities, right? It is counterproductive as well, because we may be solving a vulnerability like a CVE with score 9 and above, but that does not necessarily mean a risk for us, right? So such contextualization is missing. Now, another set of practices traditionally people confuse with cyber risk management is compliance management, right? So we have numerous regional and global compliances coming up. It could be popular ISO 27001 2013, it could be PCI DSS, it could be NIST CSF, Or if it is regional, like, if we have these banks and non-banking finance companies, then RBI has its own guidelines on what all controls they have to implement and what is mandatory and such like, right? So many organizations are super busy doing compliance management because they had to adhere to the regulatories. If a bank does not comply to RBI with respect to IT controls, they may lose their license, right? So they may be busy doing compliance management, which should not be again confused with risk management, right? So mere absence of a control doesn't mean risk. Or if you're 100% compliant to something, doesn't imply security again. There are scores and scores of organizations who are compliant with ISO 27001 2013, but they may get attacked, right? Because compliance is mostly a checkbox. It's like an audit checkbox, doesn't necessarily translate to any defenses in place, not always. Okay, so it should be very, very clear that if we are doing compliance management, doesn't mean that we are doing cyber risk management. No. On other end of the spectrum, there are ad hoc risk assessments being done. It could be questionnaires, it could be surveys, it could be handcrafted models in spreadsheets, just to showcase that there are risk assessments being done. So these are not data backed. They do not have connection with the ground reality. What I mean is, you may simply ask a question to the IT administrator, hey, did you enable two-factor authentication? He may say yes. But the ground reality is that the device may not even support two-factor authentication, right? So it's not data backed. It's not reality based. It is just opinionated, right? Somebody can just say, fill a survey saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I have two-factor authentication or I'm encrypting the data, but nobody has verified it. It's not data backed, and it's not operationalizable. The output of such surveys or the output of such questionnaires, right, should only be taken with pinch. We can't take or operate remediation projects with those kind of risk assessments which are not data backed. Okay. Another that again doesn't constitute to cyber risk management. So why I'm trying to emphasize is that unless we clear this confusion on what kind of different activities that the organizations are doing and clearly articulated what a cyber risk management is, it's very difficult to solve this problem. Okay, we will be at the losing end always unless we clear this this confusion. And there could be ad hoc remediations, right? So remediation in the sense, it could be like, say, hey, we have this password policy that we would like to roll out, but then everyone starts writing password on writing it down in their notepads, or put it in a text file somewhere on their disk, or save it in bookmarks or whatever, right? So that's again that's an ad hoc management, ad hoc remediation. Unless you actually go and deploy a password management tool where all the passwords are saved, it's not really helping. It's just ad hoc. It's just like doing some patchwork there. Okay, so for that you need lot of expertise. You need lot of automation also in place in order to orchestrate this remediation. Okay, just by doing this ad hoc remediation doesn't mean again cyber risk management. Okay, so what are the challenges? Now we have seen here that a complete life cycle is identifying the risks, contextualizing it, prioritizing them, remediating them, and validating them, right? So this is a cycle. Now, as I briefly mentioned and promised in earlier minutes of the talk, this talk is a more open-ended talk. I would like to bring out the concrete problems that need to be addressed. So what we are going to see now is how do we even, what are the different challenges at each phase of this cyber risk management, right? And how do we go ahead addressing them? That is the talk title as well, the road ahead. Okay, so the first phase is identification of the risks itself. If you take typically any organization, it could be even your college or it could be your office, whatever, right? There are simply so many moving parts. There are users using devices are interacting with applications are again hosted in cloud. There is a lot of infrastructure interacting with the cloud, or even it could be on-prem. There are a lot of processes, right? Unless you get handle of all these things, How many users are there? How many assets are there? How many applications are there? How many cloud services we are using? How many on-prem services we are using? What kind of a process are there? Unless you lay the land, we cannot identify holistically the cyber risks. So it's very, very important for us to get a good handle on understanding the attack surface itself, right? So this is like, typically when you're trying to fortify your home, you're trying to see that, hey, I have these many windows, or I have these many doors, or there's a main door, and you have to lock everything. You can't just say, hey, I've locked the main door, but all these windows are open. No, right? So we need to understand the attack surface. In order to understand the attack surface, we need to have a consistent and a mature way of doing asset management first, in terms of understand what all your IT assets are, get all the data, right? And then you can go and inspect them for weaknesses, not risks yet. First, we need to identify what are the weaknesses. Then only we can translate them to risks, right? So as we have seen, the constituents of the risk is you need to identify the assets, you need to identify the vulnerabilities, you need to identify the threats, you need to again juxtapose it with controls. That is when you can do a risk management. Now, what are the challenges here in identifying the risks itself? The IT architectures are so complex, so complex. And with now work from home kind of scenarios, we have seen even organizations overnight, in order to sustain their business, in order to continue their businesses, within weeks' time, they have to translate or transform their IT practices to enable all their employees to work from home. That's not an easy task. How do they safely connect to the offices, right? Do they have a VPN? How are the VPNs configured, right? And IoT devices. And the complex architectures are such that few assets are on the premise, few assets are in the cloud, and we are enabling our employees to access the organization data from their mobile phones, and there are vendors connecting to the networks. So it's huge complex problem when it comes to the IT architectures itself, and it's completely different. There are patterns across different organizations, but these architectures are so diverse, so diverse. This is on one hand. The other hand, the threat landscape is evolving. Every single day, we are seeing new exploit, new vulnerabilities patched, new type of threats, and such like, right? Now, how do you get a good handle on identifying all these vulnerabilities and exploits that are every day evolving on all these different types of assets? As I said, like you only need one weak link to break into. So unfortunately or fortunately, the asymmetry here is that the defenders, as in the organizations which are trying to protect themselves, are always at a lesser advantage because of this complexity. Okay, so we have to find ways on how do we simplify these things. Okay, so the next one is contextualization. How do we contextualize the vulnerabilities that we have identified? As I briefly mentioned, contextualization means, does that vulnerability really impact my organization? Okay, for example, you see this example here. There is an advisory, security advisory on a popular website, which says that, hey, there is such and such bank in Bangladesh. There is a Bansift malware that probably employed a trojanized PDF. There's a weaponized PDF that is used to steal $81 million. This is in plain English, right? Now, if an organization has this PDF file, does it mean a risk for them? Right? No. If an organization is in the same location as in that same country, does it mean a risk to them? If the organization is in the same type of industry, does it mean risk to them? No. So the context of each vulnerability is very, very important. Now, how do we derive the context? Where do we get this context? Right? So this is where a lot of advances are needed in order to, with respect to machine learning techniques and things like that, to derive this risk intelligence and contextualize this information. Unless you have a structured information from this unstructured data, you can't apply this context to an organization. This is the exact challenge with current vulnerability management tools. You have these 10,000 vulnerabilities, but which one should I go after? Which one should I go and address first? Right? So there is a lot of ample research that needs to be done in translating this into a structured data and make it, operationalize it, and then drive the risk management tools. Okay. So prioritization and rating. Now you have this humongous data of all the vulnerabilities and assets. Now you have contextualized it. You tagged each and every vulnerability, saying that, hey, this vulnerability belongs to this malware belongs to that organization type, or this malware belongs to, this can cause you data loss, or this can cause you ransomware. And you have tagged. Let's assume that you solved the problem 1 and 2. Now the problem comes in 3. How do you prioritize them? Right? How do you rate them? What are the different algorithms in order to? How do you even model the risk? Okay, so it's very, very nascent phases right now. The whole risk modeling itself is very, very nascent phases. First is you need to have data. What is the context of the asset? For example, you found a vulnerability in a server. Does that server contain customer data? Does it contain financial information? Does it contain movies downloaded by the IT administrator? What is the context of that asset? There are hundreds of such servers in my network. And what is the organization context, right? In terms of what kind of business, what kind of geographies they operate, whom do they serve, and such like. And the risk intelligence, which I just mentioned in the previous slide, do we have reliable risk intelligence to contextualize this entire information? That's a numero uno problem. Let us say we have solved this problem. Let's say we have all the data, all the risk intelligence, all the organizational context in some shape or form. Now, what are the different algorithms that we need to build? How do we calculate the probability of it's like, you have a ticking time bomb. Now you have hundreds of these ticking time bombs. Which of the ones which you'll go after and put off? What is the probability? How do you score them? How do you aggregate them? Right? So there is numerous scope again to address this by building a better algorithms for risk scoring. There's a lot of exciting that we are doing in this area as well. If you guys are interested, just shoot an email, reach out to me. You can reach out to Professor Vinod as well for brainstorming, right? And all this risk modeling should be laid up based on proper principles, proper scientific principles, right? So there are ample vendors that can give you security risk ratings. They say, hey, this organization is a scale of 0 to 10, a score of 9, or that organization on a scale of 0 to 100, it is a score of 10, or whatever. There are so many rating, security rating companies that are coming who will provide you risk rating. But how transparent is that algorithm? How accurate is it? Because you're going to take a decision. You're going to take it's like, you got a medical report done, and you have to go to a doctor and say, hey, this is my medical report. It says that something in the blood is wrong, or something in this is wrong. And you're going to take a call whether you have to take a pill or not, right? Unless the methodology of coming up with this rating itself is transparent, unless the methodology itself is accurate to some reasonable level, unless that methodology or the algorithm is independent, that it's not influenced by anyone to twist the scores on their front, right? So the algorithms that we need to build should be laid on strong principles. So there are a lot of principles laid. There is a link provided below. I can share it across later as well, that on what principles this risk rating algorithm should be built. Okay. So let's say we solved problem 1, that is identification. We contextualized it. We built super duper algorithms to risk rate them and everything. Now, how do we go and act upon it? It's just that we don't stop at identifying the risks, right? We have to go and remediate them. Now, how do we even remediate them? Now, remediating itself, as we have seen, the first problem of diverse IT architectures comes into play again. The workflows in order to address a particular thing, it could be as simple as plugging a hole in a firewall. The workflows are simply so complex. You need expert people to figure out where in the tool that you need to go and create a rule. And there are diverse defenses in terms of you have antivirus, you have anti-malware, you have firewalls, you have data leak prevention. There are diverse defenses. How do you know which is the best effort? And not all of them have APIs. That not all of them have integrations. And each organization's network will be different from different organizations, right? So automation is not realistic, but we need to go towards that. Another reason why automation is not realistic is that all said and done, you may not be able to push a policy to a device to block a threat automatically. Manually, yes, but automatically, no. Why? Because no one will approve such an automated system because that might result in false positives and disruption to the operations, right? For example, if you go ahead and block a particular API that is doing payment gateway transactions by chance, then it can result in millions of dollars loss. So sometimes even automation is not realistic, right? How do we simplify this whole thing? Now, once we have remediated it, how do we even validate it? How do we know that the risk that we have reduced or remediated or mitigated, how do we even verify it, right? Sometimes auto verification is not always practical. There is no way to determine that the remediation that we have pushed in did solve it. The complexity of scanners which are using to verify them is so complex that you have to reconfigure them to do it. It's very tough. Okay, the same with the attack paths. So while remediating, we would have solved in one attack path, but what if there are other attack paths to solve it, right? So these are numerous challenges. There is ample scope for research. There is ample scope for smart people to come forward and solve all these problems. That is when we can have a cyber safe future, right? So long story short, to summarize, we need to move from traditional risk management, which is checkbox driven, point in time, and it's purely technical in nature and very, very arcane, right? To the road ahead is the risk management should be more impact driven because it's simply not feasible to manage all these vulnerabilities and the control gaps. It should be impact driven in terms of, okay, what is the big deal? What if I don't fix this vulnerability? What is the likely impact? Will that result in somebody exploiting and stealing my data? Will it result in disrupting my operations? Can I do this in near real time? Because you have to be on the top of things. Can we unify it across different asset types? Can we automate this whole thing? So that's the exciting journey when it comes to automating and addressing these challenges and building a better cyber safe future for the organizations. Thank you. We'll be glad to take any questions. I hope it was useful.